Hello and welcome back to An Old Man Watches, where today I'm going to be talking about the 1995 horror slash thriller film Mommy and its 1997 sequel Mommy's Day. And Mommy opens with narration from 12-year-old Jessica Ann, who attends the McKinley Elementary School. One day, her mother, Mrs. Sterling, visits the school to speak with Jessica Ann's teacher. The subject of the meeting is the fact that the Student of the Year award, which Jessica Ann has won for the previous 2 years, will this year go to another student. Jessica Ann's mother vigorously protests this decision, and when the teacher refuses to change it, Mrs. Sterling takes matters into her own hands. She pushes the teacher off a stepladder and breaks the teacher's neck with her bare hands. Mommy Sterling claims to have found the teacher already dead when she arrived. The teacher must have slipped from the ladder and broken her neck in the fall. The detective assigned to the case, however, seems suspicious that the death is no accident. And that detective is not the only one looking into sudden deaths. It seems Mrs. Sterling has had two husbands, both now deceased, and the insurance company has sent an undercover investigator to determine whether there was any foul play involved. With multiple investigations ongoing and hints that the school janitor heard something incriminating, it appears that Mrs. Sterling may need to commit a whole bunch more murders to cover up her first one. Mommy's Day, meanwhile, begins a few months after the first film. Mrs. Sterling is about to be executed via lethal injection for the murders she committed in the first movie. However, she manages to incapacitate her guards and escape after holding someone hostage, but she is eventually recaptured. Rather improbably, Mrs. Sterling's psychiatrist is then able to make a deal with the authorities. Her execution is cancelled on the proviso that she has a small device surgically implanted into her hand. This device secretes an antipsychotic medication and will make it impossible for her to commit violent acts. Mrs. Sterling is also required to have absolutely no contact with her daughter because, believe it or not only is she now suddenly not going to be executed, she won't even be imprisoned. Instead, she's going to be placed at a halfway house. Soon enough, people who cross Mrs. Sterling start ending up dead. Has she returned to her homicidal ways? It seems impossible given the medication she is on. Is there a new killer on the loose then? And if so, what is their agenda? So, one of the most successful films of 1956 was The Bad Seed, a psychological thriller in which then child star Paddy McCormack plays an 8-year-old serial killer and psychopath who manipulates and murders those around her. Nearly 40 years later, writer-director Max Allan Collins had the brainwave, and the necessary connections, it seems, to secure McCormack to play the malevolent mother in his low-budget thriller Mommy. As Collins likely intended, critics noted the thematic connection to the earlier film and hailed it as a spiritual successor. This fact probably helped the movie to drum up an audience. Certainly, it did well enough to prompt the production of a sequel. That sequel did not enjoy the same success with either critics or audiences, which scuppered plans for a third film in the series. Now, despite their very different critical and commercial receptions, the films share a lot of features, not least the fact that they have almost the same main cast. Even people who died in the first movie get to come back in the second, playing new roles. Let's dig into some of the other things that these two movies can be either compared or contrasted about. So, comedy horror films often founder on the fact that they figure it's enough to be a horror movie, but silly, without first grasping that a lot of horror movies, though not all, of course, are pretty silly to begin with. Comedy horrors that just try to be silly often end up feeling less like intentional comedies and more just like they're badly done horror movies. And I mention this because these films are comedy horrors, but or rather, they're not comedy horrors, but they are a perfect example of the silliness of regular horror films. For instance, Paddy McCormack's performance in Mommy is, quite deliberately, to be clear, extremely hammy, to the point where I almost expected her to produce a flock of winged monkeys to do her bidding. The youngster playing Jessica Ann does give a more nuanced performance than the veteran actor, but to be honest, it's also much less fun. McCormack's scenery chewing is, frankly, one of the best things about the movie. In the sequel, meanwhile, there are some wonderfully goofy murders, from death by ice skate to a killer cassette recorder. I generally laughed out loud on several occasions, though I doubt the humour was the core intent. Well, except with a cassette recorder. There's no way that death scene isn't supposed to get a laugh. So yeah, both these movies are campy and over the top, but they're not comedy horror films. They're just campy horror films. Now, while Mommy's Day was less successful than the first film, I actually enjoyed it more, and a principal reason for that is that its level of camp and absurdity is much higher. It's also a film that begins as it means to go on. The method by which Mrs. Sterling temporarily forestalls her execution is merely the first of many far-fetched moments. It's immediately followed up by an even less likely plot point where her execution is cancelled and she's released from prison. The film's fig leaf for this is, as I said, her being implanted with a device that makes her unable to be violent. But it doesn't make it any less far-fetched. Once a conviction has been secured, let's face it, the justice system is not so quick to let people go. And then when many people who have crossed Mrs. Sterling start turning up dead, it only becomes more unlikely that she would be allowed to stay free. Yes, there's no actual proof to link her to the deaths, no forensic data or eyewitnesses, but there's also no proof it was not her. In circumstances like those, it seems certain that at the very least the police would take her into custody. So the whole thing is very silly, even before we get to the goofy kill scenes, and I had a ball with it, particularly when we get to the final act. But to fully talk about that final act requires my next point to be a bit more spoilery than usual. So if you don't want to hear anything that might reveal more about the films than you want to know, you should stop the video now. Okay, so the last point that I wanted to talk about is that both films focus a lot of their attention on the question of whether Mrs. Sterling is a monster first or a mother. She's clearly a murderer in either case, but the first killing in Mommy is motivated by her anger that her daughter has been passed up for an award despite getting straight A's. The other killings in the first film all arise as efforts to cover up the murders that she has already committed. But when Jessica Ann becomes an eyewitness to one of Mrs. Sterling's murders, Mommy ultimately decides this is the one person she cannot kill, though she certainly exerts a lot of psychological pressure on Jessica Ann not to speak up. In the second film, meanwhile, the early victims are people who have thwarted Mrs. Sterling's efforts to see her daughter, despite the restraining order. Is Mrs. Sterling's motherly love leading her to become a monster again, or is something else going on? Well, if Mrs. Sterling was just killing people again, that probably wouldn't be a very interesting story, so of course there's more than that just going on. But when Jessica Ann comes under threat, the mother may well become the monster one more in order to protect her child. A murderer you can cheer for! Apparently the plan for the cancelled third film was to fully move Mrs. Sterling into a heroic role, which, as ideas go, certainly was one. In any case, I found the two films that were made to be schlocky, silly fun, and maybe you will too. Next time, from low-budget horror films to big-budget espionage movie, is the 1968 spy suspense film Ice Station Zebra, based on the Alistair MacLean novel of the same name. But that's next time. Until then, thanks for watching this video, and I hope you enjoyed it. If you've seen either of these films, let me know what you thought of them.